Hi everyone, it's May, and in today's video I'm going to do something a little bit more fun, something different from my usual one-way sort of topic. Today I'm going to be answering a whole bunch of questions about a wide range of topics, and a lot of these questions are things that have come up over the years, and I've got people sending comments on, hey May, why don't you answer this particular question? And sometimes these questions, they are not enough content to form a video by itself. So what we've essentially done is we've compiled many questions, and you will find that there are so many that we're going to split this up into multiple videos. So you'll see some of these questions about things like psychological astrology. Some people are curious about what my life is like as a professional astrologer, and also some people have questions about some of these forecasts that I've been doing for world events and what's going to happen in the financial market, so on and so forth. So go ahead and check out the entire series and go look at the topics that you're interested in. And for the people who are new here, maybe I should introduce myself first. So my name is May Sim. I'm a professional astrologer, and I have been doing astrology professionally for about 20 years now, in fact more than 20 years. So my main activities include seeing clients. I also teach astrology, and in fact I've trained up quite a number of professional astrologers in this Singapore and Malaysia region as well. So there it is, let's get to the questions. So in this section, I'm going to be answering questions on global trends and symbolic forecasting. Now, some of you here would have known that in the last few years, I've done quite a number of global forecasts ever since just before the pandemic. So some of the themes that I've been banging on about in my events would be things like some of these massive global changes, particularly dealing with things like employment, some of these political changes. And I think when I first started talking about these themes back in 2019, 2020, it felt a bit premature to many people. But I think for many of my audiences, especially those of you who have been following the forecast for a number of years now, it's almost uncanny how political changes, economic changes have happened almost exactly according to the astrological symbols that we've seen so far. So today I've sort of compiled 12 questions here, which is some of the most common things I get asked every time I get interviewed for my global forecast. So here goes. Okay, the first question is, what's the astrological signature of our current global upheaval? Now, I would say that I wouldn't even call it a specific kind of global upheaval, because the people who are familiar with my global forecast will know that I have been speaking quite a bit about the change from the Earth era to the Air era. And I think this is not just an upheaval, it's simply a transition from one type of world to another type of world. So which is why many of the questions that I get asked with regard to the economy, sometimes the questions assume that this is like a temporary thing, or what do you think is causing a lot of people to be losing their jobs, for example. And I sometimes get the sense that people are thinking that this is it's something like an Asian financial crisis or like a subprime mortgage crisis. It is not. Basically, the world is shifting to a state where potentially even basic things like employment as a concept is being challenged. So I think the signature here is the understanding that we have now, in fact, completely shifted from the Earth era to the Air era. So even things like production, factory production, which used to be a pretty straightforward thing, now it's you start to get everything challenged, from basic supply chains to even what's the point of sending your kids to school anymore? It's some of these very basic social norms are being challenged at their core. And I would say this is the biggest signature that I really hope that most people are getting from my global forecast, in the sense that whatever we are seeing right now is not a temporary change. Okay, the second question is, what symbolic cycles do you watch most closely when tracking global shifts? So this one has a very simple answer. The most obvious cycle that I would track would be that of outer planets. So let me explain for the people who are less familiar with astrology. So planets are consistently moving up there in the sky, in our solar system. So some planets have a lesser effect on what happens on a global basis because they kind of move quite fast. So things like the sun, for example, like the sun moves 1 degree per day, more or less. So the changes are pretty quick. But as an astrologer, when I'm looking at more world or global type events, the outer planets move really, really slowly. So then it allows us to look at cycles that repeat on, say, every 8 years, for example, or something that happens, say, every 14 years or every 7 years, and so on and so forth. And those are a little bit more relevant to looking at things like technological shifts, political shifts, economic shifts. So my basic answer here is that these are the cycles that I look most at. But I think even deeper than that is when I build conclusions, when I go online or go on stage to tell my audience that, okay, I'm seeing a pattern here, it's not just saying that, oh, Pluto has changed sign and therefore, all these bad things will happen. It's not that simple, which is why I suppose that if there are other astrologers who are trying to sort of like retrace what I'm seeing, how do you come to these conclusions? More often than not, it's not one thing that I saw that is because this planet, then therefore. No, actually it's I'm looking at maybe 5, 6, sometimes 7 different indicators that seem to point to the same thing, which is something I can't ignore it. So that means if you keep seeing the same thing beeping at the same time, then we know for sure that there is a political change somewhere or an economic change somewhere. So that's my answer for what cycles I'm looking at. Now the third question is, what do you see coming in the next 5 years? Okay, a question like this is like basically trying to get me to summarize like all my webinars at one go. But I think if I can try to make it as nutshell as possible, the number one thing that is going to hit every single person in the next 5 years is the massive change in employment. And I am truly of the belief that employment will simply be, it will diminish to the point where your average student in school doesn't go through school with the intention of, oh, I'm training to be in this industry or to be this kind of professional. And I think it's going to be very jarring and disorienting for everybody in society, because you know how we don't question it? Like you just sort of assume that everyone's going to have a job, that if your kids go to school that they are going to be training to carry out some kind of work. And the factors are very varied. It's a mixture of technological factors. People who've watched my webinars know that I've been tracing a lot of these technological advances as well. So they're the obvious ones like AI, automation. But I think it's a lot more than just that. You also see a lot of young people whose work are not necessarily automated yet, but then they start to see not much meaning in getting a job. So there are lots of young people who refuse to go and find work already. Seriously, the only reason why they're working is because they need the money. So it's, in a sense, a lot of these, the employment systems in the world will collapse, is my belief. Now, another thing that is naturally going to happen out of that would be a massive economic shift, because it changes the way in which the world produces goods and services. It changes the way in which we interact with money, even the concept of money. If you don't earn it, if you get it from UBI or from government benefits, how does that change the way money flows around the world? And I think there's a huge a question mark around most people. Now, another major thing that will come up, so it's all related, yeah? And you also get more questions being asked about human inequality. And this is more than just a monetary thing. Because especially as you see immigration issues, cultural issues start to sort of like mushroom up around the world, not just in 1 or 2 particular countries. If you are being honest, almost every country is grappling with this immigration crisis sort of thing, right? Where I think questions are going to be asked about what does it mean to be British, or is it possible to be British if you have brown skin, or if you have yellow skin, or if you have a different religion? So these are the types of questions that come up. And which is why I'm fairly confident, even looking at astrological factors, that what the world looks like after this 5-year period looks completely different from the world that we have lived in the last 5, 10, 20 years. And as an astrologer, it's hard for me to pinpoint exactly what's going to happen, because it's hard for me to describe something that I don't even know exists. Right? So what I can do is to show you where the change factors are, And from what I can see here, all those things that I've mentioned are the areas of life that seem to get the most impact in just about every country that I've studied. Okay, so the next question is, how do you use astrology to track political cycles? You can't actually use astrology to track so basically the chart doesn't exactly say that, oh, you change government. I don't think it works that way. So what an astrologer sees in the chart is, for example, if a country is very known for being orderly and structured, for example, and if within a short time I see that a lot of the structure sort of degenerates into chaos, for example, just going by logic, so the chart doesn't tell me that they change government, but depending on the level of chaos that I see in a country, you could probably assume that they might have had some kind of a revolution or some kind of overthrowing of the government is possible. You might also have maybe certain movements, some of these social or political movements that might take root. And from the chart, we are able to see if this makes changes in, for example, family life. Maybe they start to redefine what the official state religion is. Or they might have different policies towards foreign relations. Maybe at first they were all friendly and then now super not friendly. And that's how I can usually come to the conclusion that there is a change in the political cycle, because logically, if things business as usual, surely we won't be seeing such crazy changes. So that would be my answer, that it is through looking at multiple indicators that leads me to a natural sort of practical conclusion, rather than, oh, I saw this in the chart, then therefore we change government. That's not how this works. Okay, so the next question is, what's your take on generational shifts in justice and power? Okay, this is oddly specific. But another thing that you can look at in terms of mundane astrology. So this phrase, mundane astrology, is the type of astrology that is not just for human individuals, but rather for like collective humanity. So when we want to look at things like generational shifts, sometimes the techniques I use have nothing to do with transits or progressions or anything that's moving right now. Rather, I'm looking at, what do you mean by generation? So for example, if you're referring to people who are in their 50s right now, who are kind of caught between employment and retirement, so they are not quite one or the other, but stuck in between, right? In order for me to understand what these people are going through or what are some of the choices that they might make now, I might look at, well, all these people are born in the 70s, for example, or in the early 1980s. So looking at the chart placements that all these people have, it tells me that, oh, okay, they might hold extreme views in certain areas, or they might not be as violent as other people in certain areas. So that gives us a good sense of knowing who are these people, allows us to make an intelligent guess as to, are they going to be brave and all quit their jobs at the same time? Or is it that it's a whole generation of people who might decide to spend all their time and money attending like investment courses to hopefully invest and maybe replace their salary? So you'll find that some of these generational behaviors is not related to transits. It's more related to, here's how this group of people would react to events happening in the world. Okay, so the next question is, how do you handle public forecasts without fear-mongering? That's an excellent question, and I have to admit, it's a question that's always on my mind, because I'm so conscious of it that there are all these people who follow my public forecasts, and I very seldom have good things to say. And to be very fair, I mean, the fact that I don't have good things to say is the reason why I run my forecast, because I fail to see the purpose of gathering people to listen to me and my forecast if I'm basically telling you everything's coming up roses, right? So that would be a complete waste of your time and my time. So the only reason why I do these forecasts is to warn people about events that I think most people are not aware of, or that they are not prepared for, is the only reason why I do my forecast. So yes, it's probably always going to be bad news if I bother to make the effort. And so then the question of, how do I do it without fear-mongering? I think fear-mongering can be a problem if you are basically just doomsaying without giving a good idea of what comes after. So let's talk about the concept of fear-mongering. And in my opinion, it is fear-mongering if you only say the bad stuff without giving a good sense of what's going to come next, or more importantly, what can you do about it. So in a sense, it's a bit like, as with in any kind of situation, it's okay to point out if something is not going well. But I think to put people in an empowered position to say, let's be honest and say that there are a few things in the world that are not operating at its best, and to be honest about what the implications are going to be. So if something bad happens, if there's war, if there's some kind of economic failure, let's be as honest about it ASAP, so that we can gather the right people and say that, okay, what's going to be affected? Who's going to be affected? How bad is it going to be? And then we can start planning for it. So I think where I have been very, very conscious of not floating into fear-mongering is getting quite clear about where I think the implications are going to be. And so far, thankfully, my audience have been quite grateful for it, in terms of the fact that I've been told many times, thank you for your honesty, or thank you for drawing our attention to areas of life that it didn't occur to us that when I see something like this in the newspaper, that this is the implication here. So in a sense, is how an astrologer can play a much bigger role in society than just, telling people about planets and signs. What use is that, right? So for me, and it's one reason why I've been emphasizing so strongly to my audience for years now that they really should be planning actively for self-employment, mainly because all indications show that the concept of employment is going to be very affected. And the last thing I want for my audience is to be caught blindsided. By the time, these social changes, they tend to build. So these things tend to go very slowly at the beginning. So you see like reports of little retrenchments here and there. But when the tsunami comes, and when it's like masses and swaves of retrenchments or people losing their jobs at the same time, that could be a very tricky time for people to respond. So in a sense, it's like we see this over and over again, things like COVID. It starts slow, and before you know it, it's like, whoa, things happen really quickly in today's world. So that's why, it's a fine line between fear-mongering. But I think what's more important is to have the audience know and have confidence that we can handle it, and that we have some sense of what can be done to mitigate or to react to a situation. Okay, next question is, what's your approach to economic forecasting? So my answer is very similar to what I said earlier about political forecasting. I am looking at, say, if I see indicators affecting several countries on a financial basis. So finance doesn't always mean that it's an economic problem. Sometimes it's like, banking failures. But that's why it's important to not just look at the monetary factors, but to also look at what else in the chart is getting affected. Because then it gives me a good sense of who is getting affected. Is it that the fresh graduates are affected? Is it the multi-millionaires are affected? Or is it that property is being affected? Because then this gives us a good sense of how bad is it. Because if I see economic factors getting affected, but maybe only, say, the 10th house is getting affected, then I know that, okay, maybe some of the multi-billionaires are getting hit. Maybe some of the big CEOs are getting hit, but it looks like the regular guys seem to be fine, right? Then that will guide me on what I say about economic failures. But I suppose if it's like the regular people or property in general is getting affected, then I think everyone is getting affected. So I think context is very important in being able to make sense of what's happening in the planets. Okay, next question is, how do you use eclipses in global prediction? Now, eclipses is very interesting because historically, I don't know about your culture, but in my culture, there used to be stories about how the dragon would show up and like swallow the sun or swallow the moon. And it used to be said that if you see an eclipse, it's bad news. And I would say as a modern astrologer, it's accurate. So every time, in general, and I have to admit, sometimes I'm a bit amused by newspaper articles about how there's like an eclipse in the sky. And then sometimes it's visible and sometimes it's not, right? Depending on where you are on Earth. And I'm always amused by when you have large groups of people standing out in the open trying to take pictures of the eclipse. And in general, if you can see an eclipse from where you are, the clearer it is, it's probably not good news for your country. I'm so sorry for that. But in general, eclipses by themselves, they don't always tell me what is happening. it's sort of like a nasty highlighter, you know. When it shows up, it tells me that there's going to be some level of upheaval. But to know what upheavals, who's going to get affected, I really do have to examine the rest of the chart to see what else is happening. It's just that the solar eclipse helps me to time what is happening. So even if you're talking about economic decline, sometimes these things can decline for years and years and nobody really cares until that one big World Trade Center collapse thing happens. That's how eclipses help us to know when the lightning will strike, right? So it's more of a timing tool than bad things will happen too. All right, so the next question is, what's your take on Pluto in Aquarius? Now this one is very, very specific, but I do agree, Pluto in Aquarius can be very tricky. In history so far, every time Pluto has moved from Capricorn to Aquarius, it has been associated with revolutions, and it's never pretty. Okay, so the last time we had Pluto in Aquarius was when America decided that they didn't want a king anymore. So that resulted in the American Revolution. And those of you who are like history buffs, you will know that the moment the Americans did it, right after that, the French also decided that, hey, we also don't want our king anymore. So they guillotined the king, right? And I think it was around that period of time that it set off. So those two are the shining examples, right? But what set off after that was a whole series of countries that all declared independence from their kings, whether it was British kings or French kings or Dutch kings or whatever. And it got to the point where it even resulted in some kings losing their crowns, which is why some countries no longer have a royal family anymore. Or if they have a royal family, the royal family is quite castrated, so no power anymore, right? So the thing is that, and I actually went and studied how Pluto in Aquarius has changed history. And among some of the major things that have happened in previous times was, some of you may know that Henry VIII, King of England at the time, had declared himself free of the Pope, basically. So they did not want to subscribe to the Vatican anymore, and he created his own religion, which of course at the time looks like a religious change, but it's a lot more than that. It's social change. It changed how religion was being practiced, and it led to a whole bunch of difficult situations happening in England at the time. And also the fracturing of religion into different denominations. It became the norm after that. So the thing about Pluto in Aquarius is that it usually begins from an idea, and then after that results in people, the regular people, deciding that I don't have to subject myself to an authority. And this scares me because if it happens in today's world, every time I read an article about employees feeling a bit bullied by CEOs, and there are lots and lots of content on the internet about how billionaires are evil and things like that. If history is to repeat itself, I don't think it would surprise a lot of people, frankly, if this ends up in some of these revolutionary activities that's going on. But I think more concerning is like how it would impact the regular person, because you can't say that it's not going to like screw up your life, basically. Okay, so the next one is, how do you use mundane astrology to track cultural trends? Same answer that I had for economic and political trends. And I don't think you can examine each one separately. If something happens politically, it affects the economy. If it affects the economy, it affects culture. But I think what's very interesting, which I haven't really thought about this yet, but one of the biggest cultural changes right now is associated with immigration. And I think quite a lot of countries are going to change their demographic by a lot. Some countries have really brought in a lot of immigrants of a different culture or a different religion. And I think in the next few decades, we are going to see some countries potentially lose their traditional culture. And I think it's interesting to see what the world is going to look like if every country looks like Rojak, right? If every country has got pretty much a mix of people, rather than if you go to Iceland and then you see Icelanders, and you go to Japan and you see Japanese people. But what if you go to Japan, there's like people from everywhere? You go to Iceland, there's people from everywhere. So what does it say about Icelandic culture versus Japanese culture? And I think for me, this goes beyond astrology, doesn't it? I mean, it goes into, will there even come a point where it's very hard for me to take a country and read their chart and read their culture, because what culture are you talking about? So I guess I sort of drifted a bit into history here, but I don't think you can do politics, economy, and culture and forecasting without understanding how these things have played out in human history in the past. Okay, last question is, what's your advice for people navigating collective uncertainty? Well, I guess a good example would be some of the, strangely enough, is I think some of the younger folk. So people who are like Gen Z, maybe some of the Gen Alpha kids are getting into it as well. Is this talk that people of a certain generation are having it really hard? So I believe that's what the question is asking. My advice would be, since it's collective uncertainty, then you really, really want to get into your collective groups. I think it's time to have a conversation. So I guess one of the silver linings of being in times of chaos, whether you want to admit it or not, is that you can give birth to anything at this stage. I mean, if you're so terrified that you're going to lose a certain type of government, maybe it's time to start asking ourselves, if this thing is coming down anyway, then what kind of government would you like to see? And that the more you can articulate, the more you can describe what it is that you want, you can share it with other people, get their opinions. And after a while, my belief is that there will be a consensus at some point, that people are going to collectively agree that, okay, I think given this situation, let's do this. Now, not everybody is going to agree for obvious reasons, but if you can get the majority of people to basically say, okay, all things being equal, this is the best way, then I suppose that's the new way forward. But I've been asked a lot of times, like, May, how would that look like? It's hard for me to say, right? I mean, it's like, even if you go to the most talented astrologer during the Shakespearean times, I mean, for that person to predict that there will be parliaments and like democracy, an astrologer cannot describe what does not exist at this point. So I couldn't tell you a name of what's going to happen in future. But my guess is that what's going to come up is a mixture of a little bit more of a flatlining of certain more hierarchies. Definitely AI is going to be part of this. So even this flat line may also include like uncomfortable conversations like, do you put AI equal with humans? Like it or not, they're going to be part of the story, right? And also a consensus on things like biological technology. What if it becomes possible for us to test tube babies, or you can have designer babies, and or you can have babies without father and mother, right? So even just that alone is happening now, guys. And it's like, so it's asking questions about, can you accept if we challenge all these fundamental things? And as a human population, what do we accept? And hopefully we can get to that stage without people having to like, eliminate each other just to be correct lah. So that is my hope. And so I guess that's the end of my questions. That's 12 of the questions there. But to wrap up, I suppose I will probably be doing more of these forecasts as we go along. I pay a lot of attention to what's happening in the world, economically, politically, technologically, and I always go back to the charts to relate it to which countries I see are going to be much more involved. Eventually, everyone's going to get involved, but some countries get involved first. And I intend to continue doing my global forecast. So I don't know when my next one's going to be, but you might want to follow me on Instagram. You can check out my webpage. We update it every now and then if there's going to be a new event. Of course, you can also go to my YouTube channel. Every time I have a new event, I will make an announcement also on my YouTube channel. So you might want to go do that. And also, if you have any questions about what I've shared today, if there are very burning questions that you have about the future and what the astrology charts say about it, feel free to put it on the comments and I will address it in future videos. See you guys in the next one.